morning, Year 11. Welcome to Thursday's lesson. Please could you write down the date and title and underline them. Thank you. Now, as promised, we are on to question 3 of Language Paper 2. By the end of the lesson today, you will have analysed how writers make language choices to achieve effects, and you will annotate an extract with what is needed to answer Paper 2, question 3. This is what the question will look like. It will say, you now need to refer only to source, and it will give you one source from lines 18 to 25, and it will give you the line numbers. How does the writer use language to describe the surface and the sea? It is 12 marks. You only have to focus on one of the sources. You will need to write about, writer's language choices. Your line numbers will be given, and you must only make your points from these lines. It's very similar to question 2 on Language Paper 1. And you spend 12 to 15 minutes on it and write 3 paragraphs. In fact, when I say it's very similar, it's virtually identical. Same mark scheme, same principle. The only difference is, in Paper 1, you have the extract printed for you in the question paper. In this one, you've got to find the lined numbers yourself and draw a box around them. Please could you pause the video now to write down the title, Paper 2 Question 3, what's the question, this boxed question here, and these bullet points. Thank you. Let's move on. How will you be marked? Well, you are marked on AO2, which means you need to be able to explain, comment on, and analyse how writers use language to achieve effects and influence readers. And you must use relevant subject terminology, such as metaphors, similes, personification. If you're unfamiliar with any of these key words, please could you write them down. If you feel comfortable with them, we can move on. So, interestingly, lots of candidates fail to get out of Level 1 on the mark scheme. If you are in Level 1, you are looking at 1, 2 or 3 marks out of 12. That's it. The first reason they get such low marks is because they use general waffly comments that could apply to any text ever written, such as, it makes you want to read on. It doesn't matter how you try and make this sound fancy or different, such as, it arouses the reader's curiosity. It still means to me and other examiners that you are saying, it makes us want to read on, which will get you stuck at 3 marks out of 12. Secondly, I know you all know I'm a big fan of high-level, A-level terminology, and it's wonderful to use if you can explain the effect. However, if you just identify all of these high-level terms like hyperbole, ascendantic listing, or zoomorphism, but do not talk about the effect, you will get very low marks. There's no hierarchy of language features. Nowhere in the mark scheme does it say anaphora is better than saying the writer describes blah 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 blah. If you don't believe me, hear it from the exam board themselves. They wrote last year, students who were able to comment on the effect of verbs, a doing word, and metaphors were much more likely to reach the higher levels than those correctly identifying andiaplosis, for example, but having nothing to say about it. So rather you talked about verbs and adjectives and say something interesting than identify high-level terminology but have nothing interesting to say. Now these are some of the techniques you're going to be able to need to spot. Please make sure you feel familiar with them. Have a quick read through the list. You do not need to write this down. These are the ones we're going to look at today. Please could you read these? Adverbs, adjectives, simile, semantic field. You do not need to write this table, so do not copy this down, but just provide an example, please, in your books of each of these. Thank you. Let's move on. Question 3 is steps to success. First, you annotate the extract with language choices. Then you plan your answer, and then you write the answer. And surprisingly enough, you then check the answer. Let's put this into practice. So this is what the question will look like. How does the writer use language to, and then it'll ask you about something. In this case, to describe her first experiences of cycling. Now for this lesson, I have used extracts we've already come across before, so they should feel familiar. Here is the sort of paragraph you would get in the exam, the same sort of length. And here is what you should do with this paragraph. A, you obviously read it first. B, you then start to identify turns of phrase, which means sentences or words that enable you to talk about the language used to describe the woman's first experience of cycling. Let me show you what I mean. Now, if you're a student who does not like colour and prefers things in black and white, please fast forward the presentation to the next slide. Now, everybody else, here we go. Here we have me identifying a simile. Now, I've only chosen this simile, not because it's just a simile, but because there's lots I can say about it. As nervous as a hare that feels the greyhound's breath. A hare is a small rabbit and a greyhound is a dog, usually used to chase hares. So, I'm not just going to say to the examiner, this is a simile, pat me on the back. No, you've got to say the effect. Well, the effect is it's got connotations of her being hunted, it increases her feeling of fear, and it's a symbol of her racing for her life and feeling vulnerable, because hares often chase, no, other way around, greyhounds often chase and attack and destroy hares. So it's not just that it's a simile, pat on the back, but you must talk about the effect. Why this simile? What does it suggest? Let's look at another one. These words here, burning to try my fate, conquer, collapse and terror. These are word choices of nouns creating a semantic field of danger. She overall feels pride as she has conquered this busy street, but she does feel nervous, and the fact that she feels she survives demonstrates her feeling of anxiety and fear. We feel more connected to her. Then again, we have a metaphor, but I've not just chosen it to show off to the examiner and spot as I can select language features. I've talked about the effect. The street is described as a stormy ocean, which builds the image of danger. Now this is where you could develop my response, which I've deliberately kept quite basic. You could build onto this. If you want to do this in your heads, pause the video now. If you want to hear verbally from me how you could build on this, keep listening. So, an ocean has connotations of something wild, out of control, enormous. It can swallow you up. So that tells us that the streets she's trying to ride her bike in are enormous, wild, and they could swallow her up or destroy her. So I've not just said it's a metaphor, aren't I clever? I've talked about the effect. Why this metaphor? What does it show us? And lastly, she eventually arrives at her friend's house, streaming with sweat and exhausted. These verbs show that the effects that cycling have had on her have been a lot. She feels an immense sense of relief that she has survived. Right, you've seen my example. There's a black and white example here if you needed it. It is going to be your turn. But before I throw you in the deep end, here's some vocabulary from the extract that you may not know. If you don't know these words, please pause the video and write them down now. You'll need to understand them to be able to access the next extract. Right, here you go, it is your turn. How does the writer use language to describe the surfers and the sea? It's over to you. You've got 15 minutes. Read the question, read the extract, think about how the surfers are described, and then just like I've just demonstrated to you, pluck out 4 quotations, 2 about the surfers, 2 about the sea. Pause your video to do this now. Okay, let's compare your ideas with mine. This is what I came up with. To me, the way they're described as majestically, always just ahead of the breaker, the wave, connotes that they are like royalty. They're completely in control. They can tame the waves. And it's almost as if they're teasing them because the waves can't catch up. Describing the sea as mighty gives me connotations of it being powerful, dangerous, like a godly force. Describing them as daring shows they're courageous, they're thrill seekers, they're daredevils, they're fearless. Their exultant cries show they're light and free and excited, almost intoxicated or drunk on the excitement and joy. This should be underlined, my mistake. Towering white waves. If something towers over you, it's enormous and intimidating, so the waves are menacing. And lastly, we have the simile here. Their heads are bobbing about like corks. Now, if you've ever seen seals in the sea, their heads bob up and down. This simile is very similar to the description of a seal, which to my mind makes me sound like they are at one with the ocean, like it's their natural habitat. So you would annotate your quote, not your quote, apologies, your extract, and then you'd write this up. Now we write it up using PEAT. You've met Squid, now you're meeting PEAT. PEAT stands for Point, Evidence, Technique and Explain. Please could you write this into your books now. So you need to PEAT your answer. This is the simplest way to do it. Let's show you what to do. Model answer for you. Isabel Baird, the lady who wrote this article, describes the surface as powerful figures. That's my statement. Evidence is just my quotation. T stands for technique. And E is my explanation. Nice and simple. And you just rinse and repeat this twice more. Please could you pause your video and write this example down now. Now, as per usual, because I don't know how long it takes you to write things, I'm not too sure where you are with the lesson. If time though, please copy out these 2 model paragraphs and underline or highlight the different PEAT parts of each paragraph. If you haven't had time, don't panic, these videos will be available to you and you can always return to them in dear time if you need to copy up. Please pause the video and do this now if you have time. And now the lesson is complete. Another one done. One more to go and then it's the weekend. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Thank you for your hard work.